มิสซิส กาหลง พระราชสุทธิยานมงคล เมย์ 11, 1988 I came to Wat Amphawan as the abbot in 1957. At that time, there were 15 monks and novices at this temple. The villagers who lived nearby were poor. They earned a living by farming rice and small crops. As time passed, there were more monks and novices, until the number reached 40 to 50 monks. As there were more people, there were more complications. Sometimes there were visitors, and we had to ask for food from the villagers who were already poor. It was a burden on them. This temple was poor because it was an old temple built in the Ayutthaya period and located in a remote area. There were no activities to draw people here. In order for the temple to become prosperous, I had to provide 4 necessities, that is, buildings, a kitchen, working personnel, and providing knowledge of the Buddha's teaching. The working personnel were needed to run the activities of the temple. The kitchen was needed to provide monks and our visitors with food because this place was far from any market. Wat Amphawan was on the bank of a river. Communication was by boat as there were no roads at that time. How could I set up a kitchen when I had only 3,000 baht? To have a kitchen, we had to start with a building. If I bought new wood and built even a small building, it would cost a lot of money. And I couldn't ask help from the villagers who are already poor. The other choice was asking my students if they knew of any old house for sale. I had many students because I had been teaching Vipassana since 1952. Mrs. Sum had been my student since she was in her 20s and had young children. And now she is quite old. Another student was Mrs. Pin Bamrajit, the wife of Mr. Cleve, the village chief. Do you know of any house for sale at a low price? I asked Mrs. Pin. I will look for one. If I find one, I will let you know, she replied. Later, she told me that she had found a house for sale. The house belongs to the former town manager who lives in Bangkok. The house is next to mine and nobody lives there, she said. I asked about the price. She answered. It was 5,000 baht and had been for sale for a long time, but nobody wanted to buy it. I didn't know why nobody wanted. It was an ancient Thai-style house with connecting walls wooden steps and gutters. The owner told me that the house is for sale for 5,000 baht, but he is willing to reduce the price to 3,000 baht for the abode. Mrs. Pin told me. I was glad that the price matched my funds. I told Mrs. Pin to inform the owner that I agreed to buy it. Please go to the house and inspect it. You don't have to buy it if you don't like it, she said. I went by boat to see the house. Mr. Cliff showed me the house. Let's go look at it, he said. When I arrived, he opened the door. There was a lot of dust because nobody had lived there for a long time. Mr. Cliff told me to go inside, but he wouldn't accompany me. Please inspect inside the house, and when you finish, please come to my house, he said to me and left. I stepped up the wooden steps and entered the house. Suddenly, the house shook as if there was an earthquake. I asked myself why it shook. I looked outside the house and saw that it wasn't windy at all. My head stood and ached. I wasn't afraid of ghosts. I didn't see any, but the house was still shaking. I stepped down the wooden steps and went to Mr. Cliff. This is a strange house. It shakes, I told him. Well, it was an old house, and some boards may be loose, or you might have been faint, Mr. Cliff said. I went back to the house again. This time, I radiated loving kindness when I felt the house shake. I was wondering why it shook, but I told myself that the house was old. Some nails might be loose or some pillars might be rotten. I kept my suspicions to myself. Anyway, I agreed to buy the house and move it to Wat Amphawan. Mrs. Pin was willing to contact the owner. In order to move the house, we had to tear down the walls and bring the materials to Wat Amphawan. I had to ask volunteers from Wat Amphawan to help with this moving. Mrs. Pin asked for volunteers from her neighborhood. She also provided a meal for the laborers who helped with moving the house. Before we tore down the house, I announced loudly in front of the house, "Whoever is living in the house, owners or tenants, why do you want to stay here and suffer in the world of spirits? You can follow me to Wat Amphawan and practice Vipassana meditation, which will help you gain wisdom and allow you to live your unhappy existence. Please help me tear down this house and build a new kitchen at Wat Amphawan. This kitchen will be used to cook meals for monks, novices, and other Buddhist fellows who come to practice Vipassana meditation. The house stopped shaking. It was an incredible experience for me. Mr. Cliff laughed because he knew that there was something wrong with this house, and that is why nobody wanted to rent or buy it. Everything went well after my announcement. I went back to Wat Amphawan to prepare the building site for the new kitchen. I had the foreman measure the dimensions and dig the holes for the house pillars. I asked for a boat, which was normally used to transport up to 2 tons of rice, to carry the materials. The next morning, I went to the site. Mrs. Pin invited me to have breakfast at her house. We start dismantling the house in the morning and finish it in the afternoon. We brought the materials back to Wat Amphawan by the big boat. The next day, we built a new kitchen and were able to finish it within the same day. This was quite incredible. The new kitchen was built in the bamboo grove in the south of Wat Amphawan. Nobody was staying there at that time, as we didn't have any Buddhist nuns then. The first occupant of the kitchen was a Buddhist nun whom I called Aunt Magdip. Her husband had been a former assistant town manager. I was grateful to them because I had stayed at their house when I was attending middle school in Singburi. She had cooked for me. I hadn't seen her after I was ordained as a monk. Then one day, I met her at a temple in Inburi. She had become a nun. "Why are you staying here?" I asked. "I am a Buddhist nun now. I didn't have any house or money. I was cheated out of them," she replied. I remembered how good she had been to me, and I was very grateful to her. So I invited her to stay at Wat Amphawan. I would provide her with shelter and food for the rest of her life. She then came here and stayed at the kitchen. However, she wasn't there all the time because her relatives often invite her to their house. As there were more monks, I had to look for cooks and volunteer kitchen helpers to cook for them. I asked Mrs. Bunchu, the wife of Mr. Sangwan, สีพวงวงศ์ the janitor at the school of Wat Amphawan, to help with the cooking. There were other volunteer kitchen helpers from the nearby village who cooked at the new kitchen during the daytime and going back to their houses in the afternoon. Nobody stayed and took care the food inventory, such as supplies of onion, garlic, shrimp paste, and pork. Luckily, there were no thefts, and I had never checked the kitchen, so I didn't know that Mrs. Bunchu had often taken food home, until one day when a strange phenomenon happened. One afternoon, the working personnel rushed to my lodging and informed me that a ghost had possessed Mrs. Bunchu. The onlookers had asked the possessed Bunchu who she was. She said that her name was Galong. The cook's behavior is sinful. I commit a sin when I was alive, and now I am doomed to be a ghost, staying at this house. I came here with the new kitchen, the ghost said to the rest of the cooks. How can you come to this temple? How can a ghost come inside the temple boundaries? The onlooker asked. It is none of your business. How can I enter the temple grounds? หลวงพ่อ the abbot of Wat Amphawan, invited me here to practice vipassana meditation, and to help him look after the kitchen. I have watched you for many days, and I can't stand it anymore. After you finish cooking, you take temple property to your home. You have taken onions, garlic, pork, and fish home every day. This is sinful. If you steal from the temple, you will be a hungry ghost after you die. I am a hungry ghost because I received the consequence of my rules of bad actions. Thus it greed, hatred, and delusion. My mind was attached to these unwholesome rules. I was jealous of my husband, who was a womanizer and had many lovers. When I was about to die, my spirit left my body while my mind was attached to the greed. I didn't want to leave my husband and my belongings. After I died, my spirit remained at this house, she said. I was very lucky that หลวงพ่อ bought this house and asked me to come here to practice vipassana meditation. He announced at my house for any occupants to help him move the house and come here to practice vipassana meditation. He didn't know that I sat nearby him while he was making the announcement. I helped him tear down the house and build this new kitchen. You shouldn't commit sin or you will be a ghost like me. You should practice vipassana meditation. Only cooking for the temple will not protect you from unwholesome roots, she continued. I didn't know that, and Mrs. Galong had lived in that house and had died there. Nobody told me. Neither Mr. Gleep nor Mrs. Pin, the monks who informed me, asked me to go to the kitchen and talk to the ghost. I told them that I wouldn't go, but rather let them discuss it among themselves. After that incident, the cooks were very afraid, and nobody ever took temple property again. Later, on a Buddhist holy day, Mr. Gleep and Mrs. Pin came to Wat Amphawan for a vipassana meditation lesson that I taught. After the meditation, I asked them about the incident. There was a Mrs. Galong who used to live at that house. Wasn't there, Mrs. Pin? I asked. Yes, Venerable. She had a fever and died in that house. If I had told you before, you wouldn't have bought the house. There must have been something wrong with the house, and that is why nobody wants to buy it, she answered, laughing. After that incident, Mrs. Galong showed her power from time to time. She continued to practice vipassana meditation near other people who were practicing. Unaware of her presence at Wat Amphawan, she had even appeared as she had looked when alive. There have been many people who have seen and talked to her, such as Mrs. Sharp and Mrs. Kiel, meditators and temple volunteers. They had to stay at the kitchen because there was no other place for nuns at that time. Early one morning, she awakened them so that they could practice vipassana and cook. Neither of them were afraid of ghosts. They correctly described Mrs. Galong's features, coloring, and even her mouth. They said that she spoke gently and gave advice on vipassana meditation. Mrs. Galong's mind had reached the goal of vipassana meditation, and she had many miraculous powers. You can ask Mrs. Kiel about her experience with Mrs. Galong, but not Mrs. Shah. Because she has passed away. I want to emphasize that not only humans can practice vipassana meditation, but hungry ghosts can practice too. If they really want to do so, if the mind can concentrate and attain the vipassana meditation state, a hungry ghost can achieve angel status. This process doesn't involve a physical birth or being born in the womb, but it is the miraculous power of the spontaneous birth for those creatures who have done so many good deeds. They can exist as angels or other beings by the power of their merit. This is how Mrs. Galong's mind had been refined. Mrs. Galong had very good manners too. One day she visited me. Your Holiness, I would like to go to my parents' home for a few days, she said. Why do you want to go, Galong? I asked. My relatives have passed away, she answered. What do you do? What do you have to do with your relatives? Funerals? You are a spirit and don't have anything to do with human, I said. I have to take care and help them for 2 or 3 days. After that, I will come back, she replied. I couldn't resist laughing. A spirit wants to help at a human funeral. It is unbelievable if you haven't experienced it yourself. 2 days later, Galong came back. I am back. I have already helped my relatives, she said. I laughed again, but I wasn't sure whether it was true. The next Buddhist holy day, I met Mrs. Pin. Did Galong have any relatives who have just died? I asked. Yes, sir. Her 2 nephews died from drowning while they were rowing a boat across the river, she answered. Oh, then it was true that Galong went to her relative's funeral and came back to Wat Amphowan after she finished helping them. This event showed that she wasn't a hungry ghost at that time. She had attained miraculous powers by her merit. A hungry ghost can become an angel without taking birth in the womb. This is difficult to prove because most people do not want to prove it for themselves. They don't heartily practice vipassana meditation until they really understand the Buddha's teaching.